Good evening, and welcome to the March 25th Bloomington Planning Commission meeting. The Planning Commission advises the City Council on development issues, standards, and long-range planning and transportation issues. Some of the items the Planning Commission has final decision authority for, and others the City Council will make the final decision. Planning Commission is made up of 7 volunteers that are appointed by the City Council to serve up to 3 years at a time. Tonight, we have 4 agenda items. But before we start the meeting, let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. All rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, for all those who are not familiar with how the public process works during the Planning Commission meeting, the Planning Commission opens the hearing and the staff give a report. After that, after the staff report, the public may speak to the application, and if there's a large number of people that would like to speak to the application, time will be limited to 3 minutes per person. The intent there is that we give everybody a chance to speak to the item before taking more time. So if there's a large number, you'd speak for 3 minutes, let other people begin the process, speak their 3 minutes before coming back with any additional information you may have. All questions should be directed to myself, and after the public has had a chance to speak, the public hearing will be closed, and the Planning Commission will discuss the application and those questions that were asked of the chair. All right, thank you. Mr. Markegard, would you like to go through the rules with our 23rd remote hearing?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, as you mentioned, this is our 23rd remote Planning Commission meeting since the pandemic began. It's been almost exactly 1 year. So we just have 2 people here live in the chambers and some communication staff nearby. But all of the other commissioners, the applicants, and members of the public involved in the meeting tonight are remote, but we can definitely still take public comment for the public hearings. We have 3 public hearings. You would just call in to the number on the screen, 1-888-742-5095, and once you're in, you would enter the conference code 846-100-1098. And we will have this number scrolling across the bottom of the screen so that you can refer to it if you'd like to testify. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Markegard. And I guess we can move directly into our business item here. Our first item is Crown Plaza Hotel conversion. Mr. Markegard?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this application relates to the Crown Plaza Hotel. It's a 430-room hotel, and the proposal is to update 135 of those rooms as a new extended stay hotel. Would have a new flag. So there's no city approvals required for that part of the proposal. It's permitted use. Hotels are permitted use. But there is city approval required for the other part of the proposal, which is to convert 295 rooms into 229 apartment units. And that requires a major revision to preliminary and final development plans. So both the apartments and the hotel would have shared amenities, things like swimming pool, workout facilities, coffee, things of that nature. There is a small restaurant in the hotel today, and that would remain in place. And in terms of looking into the future, there's a potential for some ground level retail, but that is not part of the application tonight. That would come through with a separate application down the road. I just wanted to highlight that. So in terms of location, this is the Crown Plaza Hotel on the screen. It's at the southeastern corner of American Boulevard and 34th Avenue. It's directly adjacent to the Blue Line LRT. In fact, there's a station just outside the door. So northbound is north of American Boulevard here, southbound south of American Boulevard. Surrounding uses include 2 remote airport parking facilities, the Embassy Suites Hotel directly to the north, residential across the street to the west. And then this whole area is part of one planned development. In addition to the hotel, that planned development includes the Riverview Office Tower, 2 other smaller office buildings, and a 45-unit condominium building located here. And then there's various parking, some surface parking here, and then the parking ramp, which is utilized by the hotel today and would be utilized in the future. This area will undergo a lot of change over the next couple of years. We've had 4 recent development approvals. The Rosa Apartments, that building permit application is in. That project's moving forward, so there'll be new apartments here. Another apartment project was approved here as part of this planned development to the east. Third apartment project and parking would happen here, and then a 4th one approved a little bit earlier this year, a senior residential project here. So a lot of residential on the way in this area. In terms of changes to the building, there would be very little exterior modification. Obviously, the signs would change. Bike racks would be added. I think there's some small sidewalk changes, but by and large, it'll look just like it does today. So most of the changes will be on the interior. Well, virtually all of the changes on the interior of the building. So just like with new construction, conversion to residential triggers our opportunity housing ordinance. And the requirement on that is that at least 9% of the units be affordable to households earning 60% of area median income, or AMI, or below. So in this case, with 229 units, 9% is 21 units. And they have proposed a lot more than that. They're proposing 46 affordable units. So 20% of the total is proposed to be affordable. And of those 46 affordable units, 35 would be affordable to households earning 50% of area median income or below. So that's a deeper level of affordability than is required. That's 15% of the overall units, and then another 5% of the overall units, or 11 units, would be affordable at that 60% AMI band. So quite a bit of affordability proposed. So those units would be required to remain affordable for 20 years time, which is the standard in the OHO ordinance. However, a lot of the other units would also have a certain level of affordability, at least to start, between the 60% and 80% AMI bands. However, they would not be restricted. In other words, their rents would fluctuate over time based on market conditions. They could go up, they could go down, depending on what the market does. So they're not considered fully affordable in the same way as the restricted units are, but I just wanted to note that a lot of the other units would be, practically speaking, affordable, at least at the start of the project. And these affordable units are spread throughout the building, and they're spread among the various unit types. So you'll see affordable units as 2 bedrooms, 1 bedrooms, and then the alcove and studio styles. So you'll notice these are roughly proportionate in terms of how the affordability is distributed among the types of units. And then the affordable units are also distributed throughout the building in terms of what level they're on, and in terms of, what the views are. Are they looking north or south? So with the requirements for affordability come various incentives. And this project is proposing to take advantage of 4 of those incentives. Parking, enclosed parking, unit size, and storage. So in terms of the overall number of parking spaces, this project, based on the affordability level, based on the availability of transit nearby, would qualify for 30% reduction, and they would fully utilize that. And they're requesting additional plan development flexibility beyond that 30% level. I'll talk more about that. And then for the enclosed parking requirement, they qualify for 50% conversion to non-enclosed spaces. They would be, again, utilizing all of that flexibility and requesting additional plan development flexibility beyond that. In terms of unit size, they do qualify for reduced unit size for the opportunity units, a 20% reduction for the 50% units, a 10% reduction for the 60% units. Again, they would be utilizing that flexibility and requesting additional. And we'll talk more about that as well. And then finally, the storage requirements. The project qualifies for 50% reduction in storage, and they would be utilizing that, but not requesting any additional on that one. So I want to walk through the 3 areas where they're requesting plan development flexibility that goes above and beyond the Opportunity Housing Ordinance flexibility. So for parking, the demand really comes from the apartment units, comes from the hotel, and a little bit from the restaurant as well. So if you looked at our city code requirements and determined that all of those spaces would be utilized at the same time with no overlap, you'd come to a 619 parking space requirement. They do have access to 302 parking spaces on site. So the Opportunity Housing Ordinance, again, allows that 30% reduction. So they would use that. And then any additional reduction, which they are requesting in this case, requires plan development flexibility, and it requires a parking study. So the consulting firm Alliant has prepared a parking study. They did that under the supervision of the city, not the applicant, but the city. So they are an independent third party paid for by the applicant, but again, supervised by the city. So that parking study considered all the various factors: transit proximity, density, the unit size, and the mix of uses. And the study did conclude that 302 spaces would be sufficient for the mix of land uses. So for enclosed parking, Bloomington City Code requires 1 enclosed space per unit. So with 229 units, 229 spaces are required to be enclosed. The Opportunity Housing Ordinance, again, provides an incentive if there is affordable housing. And in this case, given the level of affordability, it would allow a 50% reduction. So applying that 50% reduction, 115 enclosed stalls would be required. The proposal is to have 96 covered stalls within the parking ramp. You can see on the screen the parking facility, and they have access to the upper levels. So some of these spaces are exposed, and then other spaces as you go down would be covered. So they are proposing 96 covered stalls whereas 115 are required. So that's a 19 space deficit where they're requesting plan development flexibility. I would note that the Opportunity Housing Ordinance tenants would have access to covered stalls at no cost. Then the third area where they're requesting plan development flexibility is minimum unit size. And I would note that all of the 1 and 2 bedroom units are code compliant. Efficiency units by code are required to be 400 square feet. This is a city code requirement. However, 64 of the 229 units proposed are below 400 square feet. The Opportunity Housing Ordinance, again, provides some incentives on unit size. They allow a 20% reduction at the 50% level and a 10% reduction in unit size at the 60% level. So looking at the various affordability levels of the 50% units, 14 of them are under 400 square feet in size, but because they get that 20% reduction, technically they are code compliant. Of the 60% units, 4 would be under 400 square feet. So they do require a modest amount of plan development flexibility, 3 square feet in those cases. And then the 46, or of the non-opportunity units, 46 are below 400 square feet. So they require up to 43 square feet of plan development flexibility. So from in the maximum case, 400 square feet to 357 square feet. And you can see here the floor plan of the smallest unit, they call it the micro unit, 357 square feet. This is an image of the smallest unit. Again, you can see a small kitchenette, very small dining area, and then the remainder of the unit, for bed, furniture, etc., with a bathroom. So this is what the 350 square unit looks like. And then if it were 400 square feet, code complying, it would look very similar, but it would be wider. So you can get a sense of the kind of comparison in what the unit with flexibility looks like versus a unit without flexibility. So a couple things to keep in mind whenever we have flexibility requests. The Opportunity Housing Ordinance really operates with a negative impacts test. So the city code says use of an individual tool or incentive described in this article is prohibited if the city council determines that the resulting development has the potential to negatively impact the surrounding neighborhood, and that the negative impacts outweigh the positive benefits of the opportunity units created. So there is discretion on those Opportunity Housing Ordinance items, and again, it's really a negative impacts test. In terms of the plan development flexibility, it's a little bit of a different test. It says the city council may grant flexibility on development standards when such flexibility provides public benefit. So there, it's a public benefit test. And in terms of the public benefits, really 3 things stand out. First of all, this proposal provides more affordable units than are required. So 46 units provided versus 21 required. Secondly, it provides a deeper level of affordability than is required. So 15% of the units, again, are affordable at that 50% AMI threshold. Bloomington, with our Opportunity Housing Ordinance, we've been very successful at adding 60% AMI units. Certainly the 50% and below 30% especially, much harder to get those units. Obviously, they're much more expensive for a developer to provide. So definitely it's a city priority to add more units at those lower income bands, and this project does provide those units. And then third, the project really advances the South Loop District Plan vision of adding residential units in this specific area. So with that, I'll stand for questions, but I would note that staff does recommend approval, and happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Markegard. And since you're presenting, I'll just ask commissioners, looks like we're back to camera. Commissioners, are there any questions for Mr. Markegard? Bear with us.
I think the chair may be on mute.
Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Markegard? Commissioner Cookton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Markegard, I know this property houses the Northwest Airlines Museum. Is that scheduled to remain?
Mr. Markegard?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Cookton, let's check in with the applicant on that question in a little bit when they'll be up for questions and potential presentation.
Okay, we can do that. So hold on to that question. Commissioner Cookton, any other commissioners' questions for Mr. Markegard? Commissioner Albrecht?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Markegard, the 86 unit building to the east of the property, there was a parking study done on that. As I remember, there was a parking study done on that, and did they also have a request in for a decreased amount of parking stalls?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Albrecht, you're thinking of the project that would be located right here.
I don't know that that's on, Mr. Markegard. There you go.
I think the commissioners can see it.
Okay. Is that the one?
Yes, I think that was the one. I can't remember if it was that one or the one further to the east.
Okay, so the kind of phase 1 and phase 2 projects called American Square. I think the Quinn and the Ardor are the marketing names. As I remember, the phase 1 stood on its own in terms of parking, but phase 2 had more parking flexibility, parking being added here as well. But the applicant can confirm that as well.
Thank you.
All right. Any other commissioners? Yeah, Mr. Markegard, I don't know. The attendance there is off to the left. I can't quite tell, so maybe. Okay, there we go. I don't know, Commissioner Abdi or Commissioner Goldsman, which one was first?
I guess I can go.
All right. Please do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for staff. Are there any exterior changes proposed to the building? And two, maybe I missed this and maybe it's not a public hearing need, but with the conversion and by adding residential with a hotel, are there going to be separate entrances for the different possible uses, or is that going to be a one flow into the building and then everybody goes separate floors possibly?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Abdi, on your second question, yeah, shared entrances. And then on the first question, no exterior changes other than minor items like changing the signs and adding bike facilities. And then I think there's some very minor sidewalk amendments.
Okay. Commissioner Abdi, is any further questions?
No, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. One question that I had is in the packet, I did see information and a question about just the scale of those micro units, and I believe staff asked for a 3D model to just understand how livable that space is. I'm just wondering if staff received that 3D model, and then also what is their, oh, there we go. And then what is their interpretation? Is it livable? And a follow-up question would be, is this intended for 1 and 2 people? Is there a maximum number of people? I'm just thinking how small it is. I'll take my question offline.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Goldsman, livability definitely is in the eye of the beholder. I think different people have very different expectations. I know that there are probably a lot of people that would not be comfortable in a space of that size, and there are other people that would be. Thinking of myself, kind of similar path as a lot of people coming from a dormitory, in college. This would be more spacious, have more amenities, certainly than a dorm room. It's definitely a small, efficiency unit. For the most part, residents probably are not spending a ton of time in the unit. Given the location near the airport, they may be traveling quite a bit. But this is a product that would be new to Bloomington, but it is a product that you see quite a bit if you look at larger cities. Think of Manhattan or San Francisco, where you'll see quite a few of these units, and residents are kind of famous in how they adapt them and kind of use hyper efficient furniture to get all they can out of every square inch of space. So definitely something new in the Bloomington market.
All right. Commissioner Albrecht?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one more question. Mr. Markegard, it looks like based on this 3D model that there is no oven. What's included in, I think it said in the materials, a kitchenette. What does that mean?
Mr. Markegard?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Albrecht, I'll ask the applicant to respond to that. I think it may vary from unit to unit, but I think that's a very good question. We'll have them respond to.
Thank you.
All right. Any further questions from commission members for Mr. Markegard? If I don't see any additional, we would ask the applicant if the applicant's available to speak. Not seeing any further questions right now for Mr. Markegard. Is the applicant available?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we have Carl Kading and Mike Waldo representing the applicant team.
Mr. Waldo, Mr. Kading, are you available?
Yes, Carl Kading here.
All right. This is Chair Solberg. I just want to opportunity for you guys to talk about the project, maybe answer some of the questions you've heard from Planning Commission members.
Sure. Yeah, I'll take a stab at a few of them and then volley it over to Mike. Let's see. Let's take them in order. Northwest Air Museum. The intent would be to keep them in the building. If their location up on the 3rd floor didn't work, Mike and I have been throwing around some ideas of how we may find them some space down on 1st. But yeah, we'd absolutely love to keep them. For those of you that haven't been in the building, we spent a lot of time and energy with the Air Museum guys to kind of make each floor unique to a different era of aviation, and then hired a local art installation company to come in and put 9 to 10 large installations on each floor, kind of capturing that essence of that era of aviation, and put little placards on the sides that the Air Museum helped with. and really embraced the idea that this building's out by the airport, and its DNA was that the first 300 units were built as a crew hotel without a flag on it. We're at the airport, and aviation is in its DNA, and so I think no matter the use for this building, I think aviation stays in the DNA of the building, and so we would certainly like to keep those guys on site, or do everything we can to keep them on site. Foot traffic may go down as a result of this, and they may want to move somewhere that has more foot traffic, but that wouldn't be at our choosing; it would be at theirs. Entrances are certainly shared, but each floor is RFID keyed. And so you can't get onto any of the guest room or resident floors without having an RFID key to get onto those floors. And so, the common areas that have the mailboxes and the front desk and the bar and grill and things like that, everyone would have access to. Once it's time to go up onto a floor, you'll need to have further electronic information to get there. The kitchen layout, it's a combination microwave convection oven unit along with an electric stove top that we're planning in here. And so you will have it's small. You're not going to be cooking a 16-pound Thanksgiving turkey, but I don't know where everybody would sit if you did. So it does have a convection oven that does work for smaller purposes. And then I think the last question was simply size, and as you noted, this is very spacious for somebody coming out of a dormitory, really tight for those of us that would try to move from a house into this location. But of all the buildings in the Minneapolis metro, we're one of the few that's walking distance from IKEA, and I'm sure plenty will get use out of that. So I think those were the 4 questions, and I think really the big note we wanted to drive home was simply, you see here that we've met a deeper level of affordability, albeit asking for a few other modifications and allowances to our building. But at the same time, the naturally occurring affordable units in this building, just what the market demands for units of these size and this location, this era, the number of naturally occurring affordable units in this building is very large. I think at last count, opening day will be at about 73% of the building is naturally occurring affordable to the 60% AMI level or deeper. And so this building really does provide a nice public good for city of Bloomington in that respect. And so I think that was really the only additional note I wanted to throw out there in addition to answering a few of the questions. I don't know, Mike, if you had anything to add or if there's some other questions directly for us from the commissioners.
I think the only other one, Carl, this is Mike Waldo with Ron Clark Construction again. I think the only other question was kind of the parking study relationship. And as staff knows, I think Alliant has redone the parking study about 4 times. So they kind of know every single facet of this project, phase 1 of the market rate, phase 2 of the future affordable, the 2 office buildings, the ramp itself. So they spent a ton of time with that. And there was some flexibility with the affordable, but most of it was related to the transit and the OHO. There wasn't any additional flexibility asked for above the OHO allowable because that was 100% affordable building. And so I think that was the only other thing that Carl had not hit on.
Okay. All right. Well, go ahead, Mr. Waldo.
And the other thing would be the amenity level. I think one of the things Carl talked about with the size of the units is that we've got, a small restaurant bar at the first floor. We've got big indoor pool. We've got exercise room. I think there's even a sauna. And then we've got a whole area of the second floor, which used to be meeting space, that we're going to convert a big chunk of that into, I hate to use the term, but a WeWork type scenario where we'll allow for stations so that if you've got a couple living in this apartment, they can work in the building, but at the second floor with internet and space there. And so they'll have everything they need to kind of be separate but also being in there. So normally when you get affordable, you don't see amenities. And I think that's one of the things we feel strongly is a huge benefit for us and our tenants is going to be that flexibility of having the additional amenities that we have here.
All right. Thank you for the information. Just if I can just start with a couple questions. I know, just if you could, maybe, I think for all of us, the Planning Commission and those that are watching, can you really just describe the market that you're going for with this? I mean, we did have a brief discussion really about maybe kids coming from college, but is that the market, or is this the single professional, the flying a transit worker, or what is the market for these sorts of facilities?
I'll start, and then Carl can add in if he disagrees with me. Stephen Scott Management, who will be the company that we'll use to manage this, manages properties all over the cities, including Minneapolis. And in Minneapolis, there's units that are this small, if not smaller. And really, it's the transit-oriented nature, I think, of this location, with access to the mall, access to the airport, access to downtown, that allows for this to be a successful project. I would see individuals, divorcees, young couples. For these more micro stuff, it's probably going to be more single people, but with the 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms, you're going to see a more expanded nature of what's available. But I think you're going to see a pretty much of a cross section. You may find a senior that doesn't want to go spend $2,000 somewhere else for a space, and they're going to say, you know what, I can be in here for $850, and I can walk downstairs and get coffee. I can do whatever I want to do. How much of that space do you really need within the actual room? And I think it's those affordability of that is going to drive that for the workforce that we have. And then we have a lot of workers at both at the mall and at the airport that don't make enough to afford a normal apartment, as I'll call it, within Bloomington. Those are $1,800 for something here they're able to get, even though it's a little smaller, for much more affordable dollars.
All right, thank you for that. And just maybe one other question as we talk about this. We've seen the smaller units in that, but how much renovation will this take in the building? I'm assuming these are all standard size rooms, but are you removing walls and getting into that level of renovation work, or is this pretty much the existing footprint of all the rooms that were in the facility?
I'll start again, and then Carl can probably jump on. The rooms that we're utilizing with are the 357 square feet. Those are some of our, what would be larger hotel rooms. Normally, a hotel room is usually in that 260 to 300 square foot range. So one of the advantages we have here is these started out being bigger units for a hotel room than what would be. So a micro is one. We've got other units that are 400 and 500 square feet that were suites. Those will be alcoves. Then if you take one of these and mirror it the other way, we'll add 2 openings in between it, and that will become a 1 bedroom. So you'll have the area here that's a bedroom will become your living room, and then on the reverse side, you'll have the bathroom and the bedroom. That makes up a 1 bedroom, and then a 2 bedroom is 3 of these together, where we again create a separation. We don't take a lot of walls out, but we're taking maybe 8 or 10, 12-foot section out between a few of them just to create the transfer through. But other areas, it's just really a doorway between certain sections or a hallway. But they actually work very well to, a single one for a micro. 2 of them is about, 714 square feet for a 1 bedroom. And then the 3 bedrooms are over 1,000. So.
All right. Thank you for those. I'll go to commission members now. Let's go with Commissioner Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And perhaps my question was already answered after you asked your first question, Mr. Chair, but I was actually wondering about the capacity for families, if the applicant could tell us if there was any possibility of maybe small families, and how many units you think will be suitable for families with a certain number of children, or even if it's 1 or 2 kids. And then if that was the case, if you could also speak a little bit about what kind of amenities besides the swimming pool could be available if there are children in those units.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there are units in our mix that are certainly capable to house small families. Again, I think you reiterated it as well. A small family, maybe 1 or 2 children. 1 child, the 1 bedroom's at 750 square feet. That's the comfortable size unit to get creative with to house a 3-person family, and then obviously the two bedrooms that are in excess of 1,000 feet are certainly capable of housing a family with a couple of kids. As far as amenities are concerned, we're doing a little outside patio, play area, bocce, that sort of thing. Inside there'll be areas to play. Again, it depends on the kids' ages, but there'll be recreational areas. There'll be shuffleboard and pool table and ping pong and areas to sit around and watch TV. I think there's 3 Xbox, PlayStation nooks built into the community living area down on the second floor. And then obviously you noted it as well. There's the pool and hot tub and sauna all indoors. So 365 days a year in Minnesota, they can go down and play in that. I think it would be fun for kids. Again, I think based on the unit mix and kind of what Mike hit on earlier, we really do expect a number of single or newly married professionals kind of transitioning from college days into the larger homes in Bloomington, and this is kind of a transitional state there, and or those that are the tens of thousands of employees that are working at the airport of the Mall of America at $15, $17 an hour, where they don't necessarily where they can't necessarily get the affordable programs because they're making a little bit too much, but the $2,200 units across the street are certainly out of their budget. I think our unit mix is probably set up more for those individuals, but there's certainly the availability in the space to have small families here, and I think plenty of amenities for the kids to enjoy.
Okay, Commissioner Corman, any further questions?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kading, the question that I have is related to sound carrying between units. I know that depending on the type of construction, the insulation used, and the way in which it's constructed, it differs in terms of the way in which the sound carries from unit to unit. Just wondering if you could touch on that and what you're doing in terms of construction, or if that is higher in a hotel property, so that less sound carries just generally. Just wondering if you could touch on that.
Sure, yes. You're absolutely correct. The era that this hotel was built, there weren't sound transmission coefficient STC ratings. As time wore on, they started applying these to residential first, then to hotels secondarily. This hotel was actually, as Mike had noted, both the unit size much larger than the average, the 350 to 460 square foot footprints. At the same time, they were building it a lot heavier and more robust than they had to at the time. And so the STC minimum rating for housing in Bloomington, I believe, is an STC rating of 50. And we've already had our construction and architectural team look into this, and the construction standards and the way this building was built, it already meets that standard. And so this building was built better than it had to be at the time, and now hits the standards it needs to today. And so the structure itself already deadens the sound as it needs to for occupancy in a residential standard under today's standards.
Commissioner Albrecht, any further questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kading. Commissioner Cookton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 questions for the applicants. Mr. Kading, Mr. Waldo, taking away a large hotel, downsizing that, adding apartments, is this a direct response to COVID, unrelated to COVID, something in the middle?
Yeah, so I'll field that one from a hotel standpoint, and then Mike could certainly jump in from an apartment standpoint if you'd like. But yes, a direct response to not necessarily, kind of a COVID, but more looking in the crystal ball into the future as to what the demand patterns are going to be for different hotel segments. And so this hotel is the one segment. So we own and operate a number of hotels throughout the Upper Midwest, and we expect our limited service and select service hotels, so the ones that don't have full complement of amenities and very large meeting spaces and large catering and banquet teams, we expect those hotels to rebound rather quickly. The type of customer we had in those hotels are the customer that will certainly come back out on the road as vaccinations roll out and people get more comfortable with being out and about. We expect those hotels to rebound and comfortably be back to perhaps where they were in 2019 by 2023. The one segment that I think most hotelers have a significant degree of concern with are the large full-service hotels that centered most of what they did on small groups and meetings. And it's not our contention that small groups and meetings are going away completely. Our contention is that small groups and meetings are certainly going to decrease in the coming years, and maybe not necessarily. I think full-service big box hotels that did small groups and meetings, small to medium, were on their way, call it over the next 10 or 15 years, on their way to a quasi-state of obsolescence simply because technology was getting so much better. What we're doing right now, we couldn't have done this 10 years ago. And so it was another 10 or 15 years before the VA hospital meetings where all the regional administrators would get together once a quarter and go through the new regulations in person on a PowerPoint up in front of the screen. They figured out how to do that. They all upgraded the technology and figured out how to do that online. They don't want to be away from their families for those 2 days. They'd rather sit in their home office, log through those slides, learn what the new updates are, and then at 5 o'clock, turn off their computer and go sit down with their family around the dinner table. They didn't want to be in Bloomington, Minnesota. No offense to any of us that live or work there, but they didn't want to be there for those 2 days. And now they've upgraded all of their technology. They don't have to do that, and they'll never be back again. And so in the hotel industry, our kind of crystal ball is that 30%, give or take, of the small groups and meetings business is probably gone forever as a result of, if you believe Zoom stock is a good investment, you have to believe there's a contra investment that isn't going to go well. And that's us. That's those of us with these kind of larger big box hotels that serve this. And kind of layering onto that, in Bloomington, I would say going into COVID, 2019, we were already bordering on perhaps oversaturation of number of full service, big box groups and meetings hotels. And so now if we come out of it and we say, well, yeah, there's going to be business back again, but it's only going to come back at 70% of what it was by 2023. Well, that means we're either all going to be cutting each other's throats to try to get that 70% of the business, or 30% of us should bow out, find a better use for our buildings, and let the other hotels gather that and get back to where they once were, so that we're not all scrambling for a smaller piece of the pie. And so that's a really long explanation to, yes, this is a result of COVID, but not some crazy, hey, we're not doing well today. This is hey, what's this going to look like in 2023 and on, beyond? And our concern in the industry is just that these larger hotels, some of them may need to be repurposed into something else.
Thank you, Mr. Kading. And I had a second question, which you've, I think, already largely answered in different forms. But this hotel in particular, you mentioned as part of your application that it was underperforming. And if I may ask again, why was this particular hotel underperforming?
I guess in our application, underperforming is, I think that was a COVID response. In 2019, it was performing as expected, perhaps not better than expected. But again, the number of us scrambling for, as new, shinier, big box hotels that do small groups and meetings, starting with the Radisson Blu, the JW, the Hyatt Regency, the Intercontinental, as those all start to come online, it got harder and harder and harder for those of us that have been doing this in these locations for, well, this building being 40 years old or so, nearly 40 years old. It got harder and harder and harder to compete with those shiny new boxes. And so I guess I don't think our application necessarily noted in 2019 that things were going poorly. I think if COVID had never happened, we certainly wouldn't be talking about this. But the reason we're talking about this is because we think the long-term demand pattern for this segment of hotel is going to be diminished.
Any further questions, Commissioner Cookton?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right. Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Educating Mr. Waldo, you mentioned that your company operates a number of hotel properties throughout the Midwest. I have a two-part question. One is, do you have any of your other properties are at kind of this hybrid model, residential slash extended stay? And then the second part of that is just kind of an overview. I don't need a great depth, but how you came to the decision to operate a mixed use versus a fully residential.
Let's see, Carl Kading again. To answer the first, no, we don't have any that have residential and extended stay mixed use in them. To answer the second question, really it had to do with number of units in our view of demand in the marketplace. As we were looking at this, we looked at a whole scale of options from shifting that line up or down, all the way down to zero with an entire residential building, or all the way up to, I think we ended up with 310 extended stay units, because we have identified that there is a demand for kind of an upper mid-scale extended stay units on the light rail in this location. We think there is certainly a demand for that. Again, a much different segment than this building currently sits in. But really, the answer was just that we identified a demand for both, and had to find what we believe to be the sweet spot for both, because we think they work really well together. They both demand the same amenities. They both have very similar uses, similar traffic patterns, similar residents. The idea behind the extended stay is that they're here for a long period of time. I mean, our other extended stay properties in our portfolio have an average length of stay in excess of 30 days. And so these are not necessarily just, people in for 2 nights that want a bigger room. We really do concentrate on finding individuals who are in town for a project or for some sort of a contract business where they're going to become part of the community, and they'll probably get to know the residents of the building as they're interacting throughout the common spaces and common areas. And so really we believe the use is going to be good, and the reason for the mix was simply that we think there's a demand for both, and just had to try to find the right number.
Thank you.
I'll add a couple things to that too, because we've had long conversations with our management company, Stephen Scott, and looking at other markets that they're involved in. There is a lot of this going on in other markets where you're starting to see that mix. And I think with the smaller units and the mix that we've got with the high level amenities, as Carl said, it is really very similar demographics. It might be somebody that comes here, rents one of Carl's hotels rooms for 60 days and then says, you know what, I'm going to be here for another year. I like it here. And they'll jump upstairs and then jump into a apartment. And so Stephen Scott felt very comfortable that the two intermixed well together. Again, as Carl said, Carl has a family. I've had a family. I'm not sure with 3, 4, 5 kids, we're going to be the demographic here, but there's a lot of people that love to think Bloomington can be a great place to live. They get a chance to come in here. Maybe they live here for a year, and they're starting to look for other situations, or like we said before, their wages aren't at the point where they can go out there. But we think the two mixes together work exceptionally well together, whereas either one of them 100% would be a struggle. We looked at first at converting it all to apartments, and then we said, that's a lot of apartments in this location. We think it mixed better to do the 229 and the 135 was a really nice mix in working through with the management company and what we saw from the marketing professionals that we had market study done on. So thank you.
Right. Commissioner Goldsman, you have a comment or question?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. One question I have is for the apartments, are any of these apartments going to be offered as furnished apartments, or are they solely only going to be for the extended stay?
Mike, I might volley this one to you, but I think the answer to that question is still up in the air. I think we are going to offer a furnished option. we'll have to back into what the cost is to us for that. And they wear and tear, 7 years on a hard-sided good and 3 to 5 years on a soft-sided good, and figure out what that is and offer that out there. And if individuals take us up on it, that's great. If not, my gut tells me that people are going to come in with half of what they need, and the other half's going to come from IKEA, and it's going to be a lot of people trying to find a way to make. Everyone has a little bit of something that they want to bring with them and make the unit their own. And in a unit that's 360 square feet, by the time you bring a few things that are your own, you really only have to fill it in with a few more things. And so, while we are going to offer the option, our expectation is not the take rate is going to be real high on the furnished unit option.
I think that's what you get, Carl. That's what I think the marketing group said, is that maybe 10%, but they weren't even sure. It's just going to be unusual because that's more of a uniqueness part, and we think there could be positives to it, but we also think a lot of people, like they said, want to customize it and don't want to feel like they're in a hotel room. So,
right, Commissioner Cookton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kading, Mr. Waldo, forgive me if you said this already, I may have missed it, but Commissioner Albrecht had a question about ovens. And then also question, what is the laundry situation for the apartment residents?
Sure. Yeah. So the oven, it's a microwave convection oven combo unit that's going to be mounted in the unit, and then it'll be an electric glass stovetop. So you'll have the ability to do all this. Again, those combo units, they don't allow you to cook a large Thanksgiving turkey, as I noted, but they certainly allow you the ability to make anything you would normally make in an oven, pizza or things like that. And then the laundry situation, we're intending to add laundry rooms on every individual floor. And so there'll be approximately, what do we have on a floor, Mike? 32 units sharing 2 washers, 2 dryers on each floor. And that was a number given to us, a ratio given to us by Stephen Scott.
that's correct.
All right, Commissioner Cookton, any further questions?
No, thanks.
All right. I do have a question, and it really centers around just the complexity of the parking study that was done on the site. And I don't call into question the numbers on it. They're saying there's capacity that this would work. I have experience with these in my professional life. One of the questions, though, that does come out, and it does, or one of the recommendations ultimately is, if there is needed capacity, there is the ability to lease. Now, so the question centers around the complexity of the parking in the facility. Are the residents going to have designated parking? Is that how that's going to work? And everybody else will be finding their own? And if so, how do you determine the need to lease additional space?
I think it'll be a mixture of parking. Most cases, they will have a designated space. The expectation is with this market of the 229 units, we're expecting 80% maybe have cars. A lot of them won't use them on a daily basis. Again, most of the people on this call, it's something foreign to us, but it is really becoming, as we know, more and more of the norm today. And that's why they want to be next to the light rail and next to the situation they have here. And then I think the ones that we have to get set spaces for are be the 46 OHO units, because those will have designated spaces in the covered area. Anyone else who wants to lease a space, and then we'll leave X amount of spaces open for guests and anyone that happens to wander in to use the restaurant, even though most people that use that restaurant currently and in the future, we expect to come from the building or from the buildings that are within a block or two of this location.
So
we have got good relationships with the people around us too. We've got a surface lot there that isn't fully utilized. We've had discussions with them that if we get, a year down the road and all of a sudden we were wrong and we need an extra 15 parking stalls, we can easily go to them and say, okay, we need to lease some spaces from you for overnight. And they've been open to that conversation.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further questions from commission members? All right, Mr. Katie, Mr. Waldo, I appreciate the information. Any last minute information you'd like to ensure the commission has?
No, Carl here. I think we've pretty well touched on all of it. Leave everybody with the same thought that, while we are committing to a number of affordable units, this building really does provide a nice public good in the fact that it has so many naturally occurring affordable units that I think that's really the only point I'd like to, we started with that and I'd like to end with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. All right. Now that the applicant has had an opportunity to speak, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Mr. Markergaard, do we have anybody from the public that would like to speak?
Mr. Chair, we've had nobody pre-register, but let's check in with Mr. Pease for callers. Mr. Pease, do we have any callers on the line?
At this time, there are no callers on the line.
Thank you.
All right. All right, commission members. Commissioner Roman?
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I was just anticipating.
Okay. Commission members, seeing nobody from the public that's come forward to speak at this time, I would entertain a motion to close public hearing. Commissioner Roman.
So moved.
All right. We have a motion to close public hearing. Is there a second? Commissioner Goldsman?
Second.
All right. Commission members, we have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor of closing public hearing at this time say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi?
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton?
Aye.
And aye for myself. Motion passes. Public hearing is now closed. On to discussion. Commission members. We got a lot that we just heard from the applicant and from staff. What are your thoughts? Let's see. Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. When I reviewed this application, I was concerned about, the size of the units. But as we've gone through and talked through and we've seen the 3D model, I can really see this being a really creative solution to an existing location that is underperforming. And I commend the applicant for coming up with a creative solution that works for people that are coming in and more transient, as well as offering some opportunities for people that are working at the mall or at the airport, and then also for families. So I really like this application. I think it's a unique use of the space. It's being reusing space that already exists, but they've also put some thought into creating more space for people to work and live in the hotel. So overall, I think this is a great application. I think some of the size and the parking deviations seem reasonable, especially as it's so close to the light rail line. I think a lot of people will forego their cars and use that as a resource as well. So I think this is a good application in my mind, and looking forward to seeing how it all works out as the apartments and the extended stay.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Goldsman. Appreciate that. Commissioner Roman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too appreciate the creativity of this application, of the reuse of a space. I think, especially when you get some of these busier locations, or kind of as areas is densifying a little bit. I'm hoping that the more people will bring some more of the amenities. I know we heard from a member of the public who, had mentioned, some of the amenities in the neighborhood, it's kind of chicken and the egg thing, right? You know, there's no grocery store. At some point there hopefully will be enough critical mass to support a grocery store or whatever. I mean, I know we have, you know, them all really close by, but that's not the place that the locals are probably going to go for some of those things. I I'm not terribly concerned about the small space. I agree it's a small space, uh, but I also think that when you have access to other things, whether it's the natural areas nearby here, you know, right on the metro, you can hop on and get to a lot of different places. You know, it does meet you know, except for what, by a couple of square feet, you know, it meets some of our things that we've said we will allow as reductions to under the opportunity housing ordinance. So I'm willing to give this a go. I think you know, the market will tell us if this works. And um, I feel like, you know, the applicants, they know their business, and I maybe I'm wrong. I would be shocked if they were going to put this kind of effort into something that they haven't determined that there is a demand for. And I think anything we can do to, you know, yes, it's not 2,000 square feet, but for someone who is struggling to pay rent or to be able to put a roof over their head, 357 square feet is pretty damn good. So I'm supportive.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Roman. Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to echo Commissioner Goldsman and Commissioner Roman's comments regarding their support. You know, I myself lived in a unit that was probably, I don't even remember how many square footage it was, but when I first lived on my own, and I felt like I had the most space in the world. So I do think that there's probably an appetite for this. I know I've seen some other projects in other areas of the metro, you know, absorb these micro unit style units. And I think, you know, there's, like Commissioner Roman said, there's a lot of really great amenities, both retail and the natural environment nearby that likely Bloomington can offer for micro units that maybe some other places in the metro region maybe can't. And so it's a nice way to offer something like this for the community and to draw in more residents and more families, hopefully, into the area. So I am in support and think this is a great project. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Albrecht. Commissioner Roman, other comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I forgot one other comment I was going to make. And again, I was trying to make sure that we had kind of looked at some of the comments that we received from the public. And, you know, one of the other comments that I think someone wondered was about how hotel and residential coexist. And I didn't ask the question specifically of the applicant, but we've, you know, in Edina, it's a different format, a different price point, but the Westin mixes the residential and the hotel, and it seems to be fairly successful. And I think there are some others in the core cities, but you know, in the suburbs we've seen that work, and so I think it has potential.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Roman. Commissioner Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like how it's a good option for the many people who need to find an affordable place. It also facilitates transportation, so I like that about it. I really like the whole plan as it is too. So I am in support. The only thing I would really like to ask the applicants is to strongly consider, as they are, as the more people are interested in those units, to consider the many families who would be in that category of higher need. Sometimes there are so many situations that just all of a sudden come in the lives of our families where they have to leave their places of living, and they need to find an option, and they need to find an option where they can actually go with their kids. And many of our families have several kids. And so as we consider that, you know, and if you work together with our families, you are working with our community. And you are working in one of the best interests of our city, which is attracting and retaining young families. So yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Corman. Any other commissioners who would like to speak on this issue? And, while I look, or if you gather your thoughts, a couple things that crossed my mind, as commissioners, as we listen to this, is originally kind of looking at this and thinking, boy, new development. My thoughts were, gosh, there could be so much more. Yet on the others, as we progress through this again, this is the ability for the city of Bloomington to reutilize underutilized facilities, and it seems a reoccurring theme that this commission has hit over and over again is allowing flexibility so that these types of facilities, whether they're hotels or they're old warehousing, that they be utilized in the best interest of the city. And now we could sit here and say that this, as a new ordinance, which again, this commission moved forward, that we shouldn't have done that. And I think then we would be faced with a potential situation in some of these facilities like this, where I think what the applicant essentially said is it's performing, but it's not going to come back. And so you'd have these underutilized facilities. Here we have reinvestment within our community. Are there some pieces that I, as a homeowner in Bloomington, maybe don't quite understand? Yeah, that's possible. But again, now I'm thinking back to the time when I first moved to the city, and something Nellie just said about kind of inviting these families and reinvesting in the community. I live just across the interstate, and there's a reason I came back to Bloomington after college, is because the area was nice. And so, if we have these abilities to start somebody maybe as a single person working in and around our community, and then be able to attract them back as families because they know the area, that's a good thing for the city of Bloomington. As to the deviations that are being asked for, again, the parking, I'm satisfied here that, again, these parking studies and under the direction really of the city is showing that the parking is adequate, but the part that impressed me even more is that there is the ability to seek additional parking if needed. And as you can see from some of the pictures we've seen, as part of this development, there was and continues to be a lot of parking in this area that just sits there open. So I'm okay with taking that and looking for the ability if needed. As far as the enclosed parking, it's there's a small reduction there, but again, the ability to utilize light rail transit to access major job centers within our Twin Cities region really does provide mitigation for that reduced number. And then again, the size, and I was, as we looked at this, the deviation is 3 square feet, which I don't know if I could put my shoes in 3 square feet, and the other being really 43 square feet for those 46 non-OHO units. I think that's acceptable considering they are developing in an existing facility. So because of those reasons and the overall benefit to the community, I can support this application. Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have 2 more comments. One being an appreciation for providing some affordability, and in fact, quite a level of number of units at affordability at 50% AMI. I know that we've seen a lot of applications for 80 and 60, and 50 gets us, I think, at a level that seems more welcoming for folks who may not be making 100%, obviously, of the area median income. So just wanted to mention that, as well as one thing that it occurred to me while I was looking at this was it seemed as though the opportunity housing ordinance, and I may be missing something completely, but it seems like the opportunity housing ordinance may be geared a little more towards new development, rather than maybe looking at some incentives specific to redevelopment or reuse of properties, which might be a very different set of incentives, given that there are additional challenges. We see that in this project here. So I guess I would encourage staff to continue, and I know this has been. I know the opportunity housing ordinance is a living, breathing document. So this is something I think we've learned and have a great takeaway here of maybe looking at how we can encourage a little more of this for future projects, if there are properties that are maybe underutilized or underperforming in the city. So that was my last two comments.
Oh, great comment, Commissioner Albrecht. And I see Mr. Markegard was writing feverishly as you were talking. So well noted. Did I see another commissioner with a hand up? Any other comments on the application before us from commission members? All right, commission members, not seeing any additional comments, I would entertain a motion. Commissioner Goldsman?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion.
Go ahead, Commissioner Goldsman.
Great. In case PL 2021-30, having been able to make the required findings, I move to recommend City Council approval of a major revision to preliminary and final development plans to convert a portion of an existing hotel located at 3 and 4 Apple Tree Square into 229 apartments, subject to the conditions and code requirements attached to the staff report.
Okay, commission members, we have a motion in front of us to recommend approval of major revision to the preliminary development plans. Is there a second, Commissioner Abdi?
Second.
All right, commission members, we have a motion in front of us and a second to recommend to the City Council approval of major revision to the preliminary development plans and final development plans to convert a portion of the hotel located at 3 and 4 Apple Tree Square. All those in, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi?
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton?
Aye.
And aye for myself. Motion passes. That item will now move to the City Council on April 5th of this year on a consent agenda item. And on to item number 2, which is a variance request. And I believe Ms. O'Day is presenting that application.
Yes, can you hear me okay? And can you see the screen?
Yes, we can. We can see the your note slide. There you go. Presentation mode now.
All right, sounds good. Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Item 2 on your agenda is for a sign setback variance request. The address is 6625 West 78th Street. It's a 6-story office building. Surrounding uses include the City of Edina to the north, 494 to the south. There's a vacant parcel to the west and some office warehouse building to the east. Excuse me. The office building was constructed in 1997, and the freestanding sign along West 78th Street was installed sometime around then. The sign permit was issued in error at a 3.1 foot setback, where a 20 foot setback from the property line along the street is required. The applicant is requesting to replace the sign at the same setback, which necessitates the variance. Here's a photo of the existing sign on the left side of the screen and the proposed sign. The sign would be about 6.5 feet tall and almost 40 square feet.
As you know, there are certain findings that must be met to approve a variance, and staff believes that the proposed setback location meets those findings for the following reasons. It's the most reasonable location for the sign. First, locating a sign on the other side of the driveway would be located on city Edina land, which would not be allowed. So you'll see the blue line is the municipal boundary between Bloomington and Edina, and putting a sign where my cursor is would not be allowed. Secondly, the boulevard is much larger than a typical boulevard. The sign would be located 15 feet from the public sidewalk and almost 40 feet from the back of the curb. A typical boulevard in Bloomington is anywhere between 12 to 20 feet wide, where in this instance, the boulevard is closer to 40 feet. Third, the roadway, West 78th Street is a 4-lane road and has higher traveling speeds, which requires the sign to be located closer to the road to aid in visibility. Lastly, there is a slight berm that goes downhill toward the property, so placing the sign at a complying 20-foot setback would be on the downside of the berm. And it's been in its present location for over 20 years and has not been an issue. There are a couple things that must be resolved prior to the sign installation. The sign is located within a drainage and utility easement, so the applicant must apply for an encroachment agreement approved by the city engineer prior to sign install. And I have been in discussion with the applicant about that application. Secondly, there are some in-ground lights aimed at the sign located within the right-of-way that must be removed, and an alternative form of lighting is required if the sign is to be illuminated. And then, as always, a sign permit must be obtained for the new sign. I have not received any correspondence on this item, and we are recommending approval of the variance. I believe the applicant, Kathy Peacock, I may not be pronouncing the last name right, is here on the WebEx for any questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. O'Day. Commission members, any questions for staff on this? Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. O'Day, question on the current sign. How tall is it? Because you said that the proposed sign was 6 feet. How tall is the current sign? I may have missed that. Mr. Chair, Commissioner Albrecht, I believe it's, as you can see here, the image on the right is 6.5 feet tall. I'm not sure on the current height, but it looks to be less than 6.5 feet. Perhaps the applicant might know what the existing sign height is. Thank you.
All right. All right, Ms. O'Day, just one question for you. In the staff report, just the schematic of the signs, is the existing foundation staying in place? Is that correct understanding, or is that being removed?
Hello, this is Kathy, the applicant.
Okay, well, we can certainly go to the applicant if Ms. O'Day is not able to answer it. Yes, is it Peacock?
It's Peacock.
Peacock, thank you. All right, Ms. Peacock, are you able to answer my question?
Yes, we do plan on using the existing foundation, just removing the top stone portion of the current sign.
All right, thank you. All right, I don't know, Ms. Peacock, if you have any additional information you'd like to share with the Planning Commission?
Not at this time.
Okay, all right. And we'll go back to Planning Commission members. Any additional questions for the applicant or Ms. O'Day? All right, not seeing any. At this time, we'll go ahead and open up the public hearing. Mr. Markergard, is there anybody online that would like to speak to this item?
Mr. Chair, nobody has pre-registered, but we'll check in with Mr. Pease. Do we have anybody on the line, Mr. Pease?
There are no callers on the line. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pease. All right, commission members, seeing that nobody from the public wishes to speak on this item, is there anybody that would propose to close the public hearing? Commissioner Cookton.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion to close the public hearing. Is there a second? Commissioner Albrecht?
Second.
All right, commission members, we have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi?
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton?
Aye.
And aye for myself. Motion passes. Public hearing is now closed. Commission members, is there any discussion or do we have a motion in front of us? Commissioner Roman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This seems pretty straightforward, given the conditions of the property and the city boundary. If anyone else has any comments, I can wait. Otherwise, I'd be happy to make a motion.
I would agree with you, Commissioner Roman. Seeing that the foundation isn't moving, they're just simply replacing the additional structure. I feel that I could support this variance. Any other commissioners? Otherwise, go ahead, Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In case PL 2021-31, having been able to make the required findings, I recommend the City Council adopt a resolution approving a variance to reduce the setback from 20 feet to 3.1 feet for a freestanding sign at 6625 West 78th Street, subject to the conditions and code requirements attached to the staff report.
All right, Commission members, we have a motion. Is there a second? Commissioner Corman?
Second.
All right, Commission members, we have a motion and a second to recommend the City Council adopt a resolution approving a variance to reduce the setback from 20 to 3.1 feet for a freestanding sign at 6625 West 78th Street. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of said variance request say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi?
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton?
Aye.
And aye for myself. Motion passes. This item will now move on to the April 5th, 2021 City Council meeting on the consent agenda. On to item number 3, landscape screening and tree preservation standards. Mr. James, I believe you have the staff report for us.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chair and Planning Commissioners. I think my screen is visible now. Is that correct?
It is visible, yes.
Okay. So this project before you tonight, it's looking at both ordinance and a policy document related to landscaping and tree standards and procedures. I will say it's an initial effort. It focuses mostly on cleanup items in the code and this policy document. There is a larger part of the project that'll look more at broader sustainable site design efforts, and that'll be covered at a later date, ideally towards the end of the year. But this cleanup project addresses a few ongoing efforts in the city. So one is to look at some of the implementation that was recommended in that River Valley Natural and Cultural Systems Plan, especially with regard to prohibited species. It also addresses the Planning Division's multi-year effort to move the zoning code standards from Chapter 19 to Chapter 21 in the code. So there's some cleanup involved with that. And then likewise, staff regularly keeps a running list of cleanup items related to language. In the code, we keep a list of, and normally they're included in miscellaneous issues ordinance, but as they relate to landscaping or trees, they're included here as part of this effort. So for you then tonight, we have both this ordinance changes and the separate policy document. So in the ordinance then, there's some added references to other sections of the code that talk about landscaping, such as native landscaping, that landscaping is required for two-family dwellings. We're adding clarity there, as well as adding clarity that penalties can be enforced as part of Chapter 18, which deals more with prohibited trees. But this is all cleanup, not changing any policy or standard in the code. There are a couple updates to prohibited trees I'll talk more about in a minute, as well as clarifying language in a definition I'll touch on here in a minute. As far as prohibited trees, we added an exception for cottonwoods and box elder trees. And this is a recommendation coming from the River Valley Plan, noting that these are two native species and they play a valuable role in the natural environment here, especially in the River Valley and the floodplain areas. At times they may be helpful for restoration efforts. And so the exception that was added, in the ordinance, we've left them on the prohibited list, but the ordinance would instead allow these species in the areas mapped here in either a green shade or a blue color. So it's largely city-owned property, and it allows a little bit of flexibility then for those restoration efforts. These species, I believe, were initially added to prohibited list because they can be kind of weedy species and they get pretty large. They grow quickly and can be weak wooded, but they make sense in more natural settings. So the other ordinance update is adding language within our significant tree definition. And I will note this definition is only with regard to tree preservation standards. But the definition, it's with regard to which trees need to be replaced in certain situations. Tree preservation standards say that significant trees need to be replaced, but sometimes this causes confusion because the definition states certain species, but then there's an exception for these that are listed on your screen. I think one or two of those species are on the prohibited list. So it's come up in the past, the question as to whether all prohibited species are intended to be an exception from significant trees. And so with this ordinance, with the language that's added, we want to clarify that no, that's not the case, that for instance, ash trees are prohibited due to the emerald ash borer. However, in the event that ash trees would need to be replaced under this ordinance, we want to make sure that they are in fact replaced and not unreplaced. So yeah, this definition is just clarifying that a tree can be both prohibited and significant and requiring a replacement. So onto the policies updates. We added some flexibility with regard to sureties. So typically we require a surety amount, I believe it's 50 cents per square foot of the site size. However, for some really small building additions, or in the picture here, a columbarium addition that's situated on a really large site, that surety fee can be quite large for a pretty small project and prohibitive to that project. So staff is recommending that instead the planning manager be able to decide if a project would qualify for a reduced surety based off of the estimated cost of the project, or estimated cost of the landscaping. So that language is added in the policy. We also, at the last few pages of that policy update, we fixed some of the recommended species. So some of those species have become more and more weedy or more and more invasive over time, even though they're not on prohibited lists now. That's not out of the realm of possibility that they could be in the future. We also added some species that are recommended through other state agency resources, and the Sustainability Commission also provided input on these. We added a reference to the state's website as well that lists those prohibited species, both trees and non-trees. And then we added categories for landscaping areas that are more and more common or encouraged, such as pollinator-friendly species. Now, as far as outreach, since this was a cleanup item, outreach was mostly information sharing. We updated the web page. This is what the web page looks like here with our zoning updates. We send out those e-subscribe notices through email to a couple of our user groups. So that hits over 1,000 people or users. And then we also publish the meeting in the Sun Current. But no correspondence has been received. So the Sustainability Commission did see this ordinance a few weeks ago. And they, as I mentioned, they provided input on that recommended species list. And they also recommended approval of the ordinance, but they suggested that staff add clarifying language about a growing season and what that entails. So that language is updated in the ordinance that's in your packet, just to clarify that one growing season is equal to 1 year. And that's found where we talk about sureties. And I also wanted to mention some of the commissioners recommended, perhaps as a part of a different project later down the road, that staff look at some of the screening standards. They were especially concerned about daycares or other related uses. I'm just finding that some of these uses are desired, but that the screening requirements can be a barrier to some of those. However, staff has noted too that screening requirement for daycares and some related uses, it's required around the perimeter of those uses when they're adjacent to single family. And they came about because we've received complaints in the past. So this ordinance then will look at the April 19th City Council meeting next for public hearing. Don't have any more slides. I'm happy to answer questions. Staff does recommend approval with this motion, but happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. James. Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. James, a random question, and you may have mentioned this and I missed it. On slide 5, where you talk about significant trees, and then there's a list of trees that are accepted, EX accepted. What is the difference between a tree being on the accepted list there, but not on the prohibited list?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Roman. So the accepted trees here, if they're removed on a site, they would not need to be replaced in the event that replacement's required in this ordinance.
Right.
So,
I'm just wondering how we differentiate between ones that are prohibited, which we have clear reasons why, and ones that we think you don't have to replace. And don't get me wrong, I think we could do with a lot less silver maples, but I just wasn't sure what the difference was between the two.
Yeah, thank you. My initial understanding looking at this list of species, a lot of them are pretty weedy, and there could be a lot of kind of suckers or pretty narrow stems that shoot up. And I believe this preservation ordinance, the replacement requirement, speaks to the caliper trees. So we measure, X amount of caliper that would need to be replaced. And so if we counted each and every little sucker here, it might actually add up to a large amount that would need to be replaced,
Okay.
even though these suckers are relatively small on that site.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
All right. Any additional questions for Mr. James? Commissioner Abdi?
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarification, as a resident, in viewing this language proposal in the ordinance, it has to do more with existing, with new developments possibly, correct? Or if I'm doing a large addition and I'm substantially cutting back on large trees or whatever the case may be, for your typical residential, like if I were to cut down any tree on my single family house for no reason on my lot, that is, for, to just get rid of it. Would that be not in compliance with this ordinance? Do I need to check in with staff to make sure that, I'm meeting certain quota? And considering that this is an existing use, possibly a very mature tree that may or may not have an issue, are there going to be any compliance issues if I decide to take one down and not replace it?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Abdi, good question. So yeah, in most situations, single family residence removing a tree, there's no restriction on that. Where this ordinance applies is for single and two family subdivisions.
All right. Any further questions for Mr. James? Not seeing any. Well, since the city's the applicant, I guess we'll, at this point, go to the public hearing. Mr. Markegard, is there anybody from the public that is registered or would like to speak to this item?
Mr. Chair, nobody has pre-registered, but we'll check in with Mr. Pease. Mr. Pease, do you have anybody on the line?
There are no callers on the line. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, commission members, seeing that nobody from the public would like to speak to this item at this time, is there a motion to close public hearing? Commissioner Goldsman?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
All right, we have a motion to close public hearing. Is there a second? Commissioner Albrecht?
Second.
All right, commission members, we have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi?
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton?
Aye.
An aye for myself. Motion passes. Public hearing on this item is now closed. Commission members, is there any discussion? I myself looked through the ordinance. I read it. Feels like good cleanup to me, and I'm supportive of the changes. Any other commission members like to speak? Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too am supportive. And I just thank the staff. This kind of cleanup work is not the flashy fun stuff that's most people clamor for in public service, but it's important work, and I appreciate the work that's been put into it.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I, again, appreciate the staff's work in this. And one of the things that I read that I really appreciated is talking about pollinators as well as perennials. I think I saw a line in there about, where snow would cover a tree or be pushed up against a tree, they could use a perennial type plant instead. So I like the flexibility that we're looking at landscaping, not just on trees, but also on pollinator or shrub or perennial plants that are native to this location.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldsman. Any further discussion? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion. Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In case PL 2021-29, I move to recommend approval of the ordinance and associated changes to the landscaping and screening policies and procedures document as attached to the staff report, to make minor amendments to chapters 10, 18, 19, 21, and 22 of the city code, and to move the landscaping and screening and tree preservation sections from chapter 19 to chapter 21.
Thank you, Commissioner Roman. All right, Commission members, we have a motion in front of us. Is there a second? Commissioner Albrecht?
Second.
All right, Commission members, we have a motion and a second. Motion in front of us to recommend approval of the ordinance and associated changes to the landscaping and screening policies and procedures documented as attached to the staff report to make minor amendments to Chapter 10, 18, 19, 21, and 22 of the City Code, and to move the landscaping and screening and tree preservation sections from Chapter 19 to 21. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Albrecht?
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi?
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton?
Aye.
And aye for myself. Motion passes. All right, those changes will move forward to a city council meeting on April 19th as a public hearing. All right, commission members, we are now on to item number 4, our last item, which is not a public hearing. It is for information, and it's the Congress of New Urbanism Portland Legacy Project update from Ms. Farnham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, let me get my presentation up. And can you see that?
Yes, we can.
All right, we're moving forward. Okay, good evening, and I am presenting an update on the Portland Legacy Project, which is a project through the Congress for New Urbanism, which is a national organization of urban designers, planners, engineers that really focus kind of on a lot of transit-oriented development and just more people-oriented urbanism, I should say, mixed-use kinds of things. And every year when they have annual, which they call a Congress, they select a handful of projects, generally 3 or 4, in the host community. And so in 2020, last year, that the annual Congress was going to happen in the Twin Cities. Of course, that ended up being canceled, or it was virtual. But in 2019, we applied for a legacy project and were selected. It was a project that we did in partnership with the city of Richfield. And I'll just kind of jump into this now. So as I said, these legacy projects are done in conjunction with the CNU's annual conference. And so they're really intended as kind of a short design charrette, usually focused around about a 1-week, very interactive activities with the public as well as stakeholder groups. What happens with these is CNU pairs the project national design firm who comes in for that week and brings a fresh set of eyes on the area, the situation, and gets a lot of input, and then produces a plan of recommendations based on what they've heard and what they see and their expertise. As I said, it was a competitive selection process. We partnered with the city of Richfield to look at this area around Portland and 494 on both sides of the freeway. Okay, let's see. There we go. So some of the goals of the project were to create an attractive gateway and a sense of identity. So this is a major entryway to both of our cities. And also these are areas where, well, both of our cities are redeveloping, and we're seeing demographics and thus changing community needs. So responding to those changes. Probably the biggest thing is improving mobility for all modes and connectivity across 494. 494 is kind of a barrier between our two communities. And also there's a fair amount of affordable housing that's in this area. So maintain that, but also look at potential opportunities to expand housing options in the area. One of the objectives of legacy is to look at examples. The project selected often examples of to create like a replicable model. And in this case, like a suburban model where the redevelopment area was really focused around some major infrastructure changes. In this case, 494, and well, 494 was the big one. The other big thrust or goal of these projects is to enhance the public realm. So just a little bit of the site context. The area of focus is really right around the intersection of Portland and 494. So both sides of Portland extending roughly north to 77th and south to American. However, the study area, we really wanted to look at a broader extended to Nicollet and 12th, and then north and south a little bit of that focus area. And we're calling that bigger area kind of the walk and streetscape enhancement zone, where that central focus area is really kind of the redevelopment zone or the focal area. So why focus on this area? Again, both areas are characterized as aging commercial nodes. Bloomington, we've got a couple of old shopping centers. In Richfield, there's a lot of auto-oriented kinds of uses. As I mentioned before, this is a major gateway to both of our cities. And then there's some major public transportation investments going on here that we thought it would make some sense to look at this area, come up with some ideas in conjunction with, and maybe help to provide some guidance for those other projects. The big one, of course, is the 494 project, which is really focused around the interchange of 494 and 35W, but it does extend to the east and west. And the concept right now is to basically rebuild the Portland interchange and potentially close Nicollet and 12th, which provides some opportunities I'll talk about in a little bit. The other big project is the planned D-Line BRT, which Metro Transit is working on, and there will be 2 stops. You can see on this graphic the 2 blue circles with the white in the center. So there's one in Bloomington right by our Walmart, and then one up at 77th right by Roosevelt Park in Richfield. So this is a great opportunity to potentially enhance more walkability and transit-oriented design. So the consultant team came here for about a 2-day visit back in 2019, gearing up for our week-long design charrette in March of last year, which ended up getting canceled or postponed, I should say. And they did a lot of reconnaissance. We had some meetings with staff, with stakeholders, and so they prepared some existing conditions information. So this is, these next couple of slides are all about challenges and opportunities. So connectivity is probably the biggest thing here. Again, as I said before, 494 is a fairly significant barrier. There's a lot of residential, particularly on the Richfield side, and there's a lot of people that come over to the Bloomington side to shop at the 2 shopping centers, as well as, and particularly Walmart. But there's back and forth between them, and the pedestrian environment is not great. So one of the opportunities here with this MnDOT project is this proposal to close off access at Nicollet and 12th and make those 2 that's an opportunity to make those two streets a lot more pedestrian friendly. And that would really improve access across here. But there's also opportunity when Portland is reconfigured to make that more pedestrian friendly as well. So they are also looked at what are some of the, what they're called resources or public spaces, places where people like to gather. So there's a number of parks in the area. Roosevelt Park in Richfield is the big one, Smith Park in Bloomington. There's the Excel corridor that goes right along down to Smith Park. There's a couple other smaller parks, and there's a fair amount of churches in this area. So those are kind of public gathering, community gathering places. They looked at the existing kind of land use and zoning framework for that's in place in the two cities. Richfield has already implemented mixed use zoning along the 494 corridor. So they've got zoning that really does provide for mixed use at this point. Bloomington does not. I would anticipate one of the recommendations that will come out of this will be to consider rezoning these areas right at Portland and America, the two shopping centers essentially that are currently zoned B2, and rezone them something like B4 that would allow residential or allow a broader mix. Very, very similar to the kinds of recommendations that you just heard at your last meeting on Lindale. The other, I think, idea here is that much of this stretch, well, really much of American is zoned for freeway-oriented commercial uses, which is probably makes some sense, but particularly as we're looking at changes to Nicollet and 12th, there might be some opportunity to, maybe rethink some of that zoning as well. So at this point, they have drafted up some goals and principles, and I'm not going to go through all of these. These were in your packet. But essentially, create more mixed use and enhance mobility and enhance access to parks and such. And then they've also begun drafting some high-level guidance. And this plan will be relatively high level. So this is the product. Generally, these legacy projects are the product of a week-long kind of a very highly interactive community engagement sort of process. And so while they provide good guidance, they aren't the product of a longer term, like the Lindale plan was 1.5 years, and it involved some pretty intensive analysis that was done. These are more conceptual in nature and more sort of, here's what we're hearing, here's what we're seeing, and here's what we're recommending. Nonetheless, we certainly anticipate and hope that these provide some good guidance for us. But so here's just some of the ideas that are framing up. And again, enhancing that multi-mobility throughout this area is probably the biggest thing. And so identifying some of the routes to prioritize for pedestrian and bicycle enhancements. And then identifying opportunities to enhance accessibility and safety. So things like access management perhaps, or just other kinds of streetscape kinds of things that would perhaps make the area more safe, particularly for, well, really for all mobile modes, but right now it really favors automobiles and maybe looking at making it safer for bicyclists and pedestrians. The plan will also include some design guidance. So streetscape and landscaping, some building design. So when and if properties redevelop, some of this may not be any different than what we already have. We've got some design standards in our mixed use districts, so B4, C4, C5, LX, et cetera. And my anticipation would be that the kinds of things that they might recommend would be pretty similar to the kinds of standards we already have. But looking at some thoughts, some ideas about street furniture, and also creative placemaking opportunities in the area. So some of the types of guidance I'm anticipating in the plan would be really focused around addressing redevelopment barriers. So as we talked before, being potentially proactive with rezoning, particularly in Bloomington in the B2 areas. Land assembly, this is probably going to be opportunity driven, but since many of these properties are small, in order for them to redevelop will probably require some kind of parcel consolidation and assembly. But by identifying that in a plan, it could become, you know, as opportunities arise through the HRA, for instance, to start to for some properties, you know, this will provide some guidance around that. Also, some ideas about removing process barriers like expedited permit review and fee waivers. Again, we already have some of these kinds of tools we use, so I don't know that that's anything different for us. And then identifying some potential projects to fund or to include in our CIP or to go after grants or team up with others on. So we've done a fair amount of outreach on this project. We did a lot last year, and unfortunately the shutdown came literally a week before the week-long charrette was going to take place, and we'd already done a lot of outreach, so that was unfortunate. But we were able to then, we basically picked it up again and dusted it off and did some more. So we did things like press releases both last year as well as this year. We did social media. We've had our Bloomington briefing. Richfield too has a newsletter that they've had some articles. And we sent out these postcards. We did that last year. We did it again this year as we went virtual this year. And we sent postcards to, well, that 3,500 people was in both Bloomington and Richfield. And they were in Spanish as well as English. We held a virtual community meeting on February 24th. The consultant kind of walked through their initial findings and some initial recommendations, and they introduced their online engagement tools, which hopefully some of you had the opportunity to check out a little bit. And I don't know if anybody had the opportunity to join in on February 24th, but that presentation was also on the website. And the website that the consultant had for us with the interactive tools closed down yesterday, but we will be getting the results and summaries of all of that input, and we will have it on the city's website, on the project website, as well as the recording of that February 24th community meeting, if you do want to go back and take a look at it. During February, we also held a series of stakeholder meetings. We had one with a handful of developers, mostly developers who do mixed use, residential mixed use. And we also had one with agencies. So we had folks from MnDOT, Metro Transit, and Hennepin County, and also folks from Excel, because one of the opportunities here is to potentially improve upon that existing, there's a sidewalk that goes through that Excel corridor, basically from American to Smith Park. And it's about a 4-foot wide concrete sidewalk. And so improving on that connection. And Excel seems pretty open to that. So that's good news. And we also sent out individual letters to all the property owners and tenants in that focus area, offering them one-on-one interviews essentially with the consultant. We only got one taker, but we did get one taker. So at least we got one, but we did offer that. And then with our community outreach staff, as well as just those of us in the planning department, we did a lot of other outreach to folks in the area, as well as the Chamber of Commerce and school districts. And then we have our standard e-subscribe that it went out to. So the next steps. So the public input interactive tools closed down yesterday. And so the consultant is pulling together what they heard from that. And we will, and so they're taking all of that input, and then they're starting to pull together kind of the draft final plan. There is a joint informational meeting scheduled of the two city councils, so Richville and Bloomington, on April 21st. And that'll be an informational meeting where the consultant will provide the presentation. And then we'll bring it back. Well, the consultant will finalize the plan, and then we'll bring it back in May for public hearings, both at the Planning Commission and at the City Council to adopt essentially the plan. And that's the presentation. So I am happy to stand for questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Farnham. Commission members, any comments or thoughts? My understanding is you were looking for any feedback that the commission may have on goals, principles, that sort of thing at this point. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, commission members. Yep, I'm just looking for any feedback you have on any of the ideas that were presented.
All right. Well, maybe I'll just start here as other members. I was able to catch the tail end of the February meeting. I apparently looked at the Eastern Standard Time, not realizing that I should have adjusted for Central. But a couple of things I did here, and I just to reiterate, is that in that multimodal mobility side is that crossing. Really, the pedestrian crossing of 494 is a very big deal for those members of the community that were able to tune in, and not just at a specific location, but in general, the barrier that the interstate poses. And we know that from other areas within the city and within the metro as well. So glad to see that one area. And I don't know how much this falls under this, but I noticed we have kind of this principle of affordable housing. But one thing we've talked about in the past, let's see, preserve and provide affordable housing options, and I don't know if it fits into this under the principles goals, is making sure we're providing affordable commercial space, so that our mom and pop shops can continue to thrive in Bloomington. So I don't know if that fits in with this or not, but just wanted to make sure of that. Otherwise, the principles that were laid out, I'm certainly agree with. I'm a little hesitant on my own to say to put more housing next to the interstate, but understand mixed use. Could be valuable. We just have to be smart about it. So I'll leave those comments. And Commissioner Cookton.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a couple questions for Ms. Farnham. First, one thing that was mentioned in the staff report was protection of naturally occurring affordable housing. Is there anything in our code or anything that prevents redevelopment of naturally occurring housing, or is that still up to the market's whims to do that? Or what is in our code in regards to that?
Sure, Mr. Chair, Member Cookton. So the OHO requires the addition of the 9% whenever there's new housing developed, whether it's getting funding or not. So anytime there's new housing development of it, well, I guess it's 20 units or more, the OHO kicks in, and there's a minimum requirement of creation of 9% of affordable units. With regard to preservation of existing or NOAA units. The OHO only kicks in if that development is getting funding from the city or the HRA. So that would, so that's then the OHO and the preservation of 9% would be required if it was a NOAA property that was funded, receiving funding through the city or the HRA, and they came in and did a substantial rehab. They would need to preserve at least 9%. But if it wasn't funded by the city, there's no ordinance requirement to do anything. We have another provision in our code, which is the 90-day tenant protection. And that was put in place because of some of these issues where developers were coming in and buying up older apartment buildings, which were generally NOAA, and fixing them up and raising the rents and essentially displacing the residents that were there. And how we responded to that, we and a lot of, well, not a lot, but several other communities in the metro, the tool that seemed to work the best is this 90-day protection ordinance. And while that doesn't say you can't get rid of the units, it does say that you have to notify existing tenants and give them some time to relocate. So we do have that on the books as well. But it really, I mean, there's probably some legal issues. We couldn't just say, you know, you're the owner of a NOAA property and you can't ever change that. You can't convert it to an office. You can't tear it down. You can't, you know, we would run into some problems. Now, one of the things, if somebody bought it with the intention of doing something other than residential, they would have to most likely rezone it. And so there would be some discussion around it at that point, and perhaps a land use change as well. But in terms of what kinds of hard and fast rules do we have to say you can't change or remove NOAA, we don't really have anything, but we do have some tools that if you want to fix up the NOAA, that you could perhaps do that under the OHO and have access to those other incentives. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, Ms. Farnham. Thank you. And Commissioner Chair, I have a second question, if I may.
Go ahead.
Ms. Farnham, one of the recommendations, as you mentioned, was to add possibly additional housing stock to this area. Is there a concern from staff that we're going to residential on some of these things? As you mentioned, you know, Lindell Avenue, we're proactively rezoning to get more residential. We did that a year ago at, you know, similar again at 98th and Lindale, proactively rezoning to get more residential. If we do the same thing here, is there a concern that we're allowing residential in too many places, or we're shifting to residential?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Cookton, perhaps, but I think the idea in zoning it to allow for broader uses would really, the market would kind of dictate that. You're just kind of setting the table. I mean, by rezoning it to a zoning district that would allow residential wouldn't make residential happen. Likewise on Lindale, in those two nodes where the recommendation was to rezone, I mean, we could proactively rezone it to set the table and reduce the hurdles that a developer would have to go through if they wanted to do residential. But rezoning in and of itself is not going to make residential happen. It might entice it, but ultimately it's going to be the market driving that. Also, I think, so with a recommendation here to consider rezoning, proactive rezoning, I mean, that would be considered by the Planning Commission and City Council in light of all of the other areas of the city that you might want to prioritize for proactive rezoning, for instance. And where this would fall in that list, I'm not really sure. Just going back a few years to when we did the neighborhood commercial node study, Portland and American came out as #1 as a potential redevelopment area. So now, whether that still stands or not, I mean, things have changed, and Lindale has certainly taken on more life. And we're going to be kind of revisiting those priorities sometime this year. So, you know, we'll see what happens there. But that's kind of how the process would work. So this plan I'm anticipating this plan will recommend that we consider rezoning, but that recommendation would be considered in light of all of the other priorities that the city has. And I just wanted to go back to Chair Solberg's comment too about, I mean, point well taken, you know, whether or not residential is appropriate immediately adjacent to the freeway. That, I mean, that's a great question. So, you know, that would be something to consider as well. And I'm sorry, but I also wanted to comment on another comment that Chair Solberg mentioned, and that was the affordable commercial. And I thank you for bringing that up, because that is a comment that has come up in the stakeholder meetings. So I know that the consultant is going to be looking at some tools, especially displacement. And I know the city of Richfield is looking at having a policy about displacement of businesses. So there may be some ideas that are presented in this plan for how to minimize displacement of existing businesses. So I just wanted to follow up.
Thank you for coming back to that. Commissioner Cookton, did you have any additional comments?
I do, but I should let some other folks have a chance here.
Okay. All right. Other commission members, any comments or thoughts for Ms. Barnum? Commissioner Abdi.
Thank you, Chair. So I live really close to this area, and we are regular in using the freeway from this side of town. You know, we get gas from here mostly, and then the Walgreens, the Subway, and our favorite, you know, Denny's bakery right behind the toy store, which has been now, I believe, vacant for over 2 years now. And I don't know if that's going to become a redevelopment site. I think that's one of the corner. It's right on the corner of Portland and American Boulevard of where the subject area is. And I'm not sure if there's any possible housing redevelopment or not, but I would love this corner to continue to be this small, you know, mom and pop shop corner. I know we have a lot of big box. We don't have a grocery. I know we have the Walmart around here, but we don't have any coffee shops in this area. You know, I love going to the bakery with my family. It has a small seating area, but we don't have like a lot of walkable destination places. And considering that Portland is not as it's a high commuter corridor. And I feel like, you know, right off the freeway, traffic is coming real fast right on to the Bloomington side, at least. And crossing between the Walgreens and the Subway or the dollar store is very risky. And for folks who are coming off the bus station on toward the Walmart side and crossing over to the other side, they have to use the actual crossroad and then kind of walk back into the sidewalks to get onto the other side. So I don't know what, you know, do we need to slow traffic on this corridor between where the study section is, between the two commercial activities that are facing each other on the Bloomington side? I would love it if it was a little bit slower. And I understand that might be a challenge considering that this is right on the freeway access in and out of that. But I hope this corner becomes a place where we can walk as a community, because we drive to everything. And if we can, you know, get coffee from here or like have something fun, like a neighborhood retail sales and services, that we continue to operate this corner as such, and that it becomes a family friendly. I know we cannot control traffic to some extent, but some of the uses that we are attracting are like large big boxes, and we tend to forget that there are a ton of residential areas. And and I feel like we're moving away from the 60s and 70s commercial big boxes and the uses that are separating residential and the commercial. But walkability for residential and family members, I think, a very desirable thing. And I work in Minneapolis, and we have that in the zoning code, where you have mixed uses, where right next door to residential you have a grocery store or a bar, or whatever the case may be. Even, and I know Joanna at one point in a previous conversation brought it up, something about a distillery around here. Like, I'm not a drinker, but I'm sure my our residents here in Bloomington are would love to have a place to unwind and just go right across the street on a not too far from their house, without having to go too far outside of a Bloomington or whatever the case may be. But how do we attract those type of activities without losing the identity, so to say? I like the small scale-ness of the corridor, but I would love to see more of it. And maybe that goes to, sorry, I was reading the language proposed in the report. What's the term? Placemaking, whatever that looks like. So I'm really excited to seeing what possibilities there are for allowing, walkable, mixed use. And I know we tend to focus on housing, but I'm interested in anything but housing in this location. Richfield can do the housing for now.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Commissioner Abdi. Yeah, and I think that the idea would be to accommodate a variety of uses. And maybe it turns out that B2 is the best use there. The thing with B2, it does allow some more auto-oriented uses, more so than the B4 does. But I mean, those are all great things to keep in mind. One of the things you mentioned, the Kids R Us, or whatever that is right on the corner there. And that's a classic example of the challenges of redevelopment in this area. You mentioned it, it's been vacant for at least the last year. And because that lot has no parking. There's like 2 spaces up in the front, and that's it. So it's really hard for them to even find users for that space because of the zoning challenges. So without combining that parcel with an adjacent parcel, it's going to be a real challenge to redevelop this area without cooperation amongst property owners and combining and whatnot. But I appreciate your comments about keeping it as a local destination, and I know that there are a lot of residents, particularly on the Richfield side, and they do come over and use the shopping centers. And so this plan, probably the biggest focus of this plan, will be on those public realm improvements to try to make the area more walkable, more comfortable to walk and bike and get around. And you're absolutely correct. As a major access point off of a freeway, that's a challenge to do all of those things. But I guess the good news is that the consultant who is working on this has a fair amount of experience working in transportation issues as well. So we hope to have at least some creative ideas and suggestions that come out of this that we can, potentially draw on as some of the details of the MnDOT project start to become clear, which could be a little while now, but that's the idea, is that this plan would provide us some guidance.
All right, Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. One of the comments that I was looking at is obviously we've been talking about walkability, and Commissioner Abdi, you're after my heart to talk about that community and culture and a place where people can congregate. Like we talked about breweries and distilleries, tap rooms, etc. One of the things that I've seen the city become more flexible on is the parking piece, and it would be interesting to see if we could get creative in this plan to do shared parking in a way that, you know, we have an office building that uses it during the day, but then we've got, you know, apartments that will use it at night, and being more of a flexible thought of when is this parking really being used and how. And I think that there's some definite opportunities in this area. I think, you know, you look at Denny's, and I see it's a great resource. It's a local place. It's in an island of cement. And so could we do something, you know, where we can obviously use parking, but then obviously make it more green space, more inviting, more walkable, et cetera. So I'm excited to see this location develop. I think that there's a lot of opportunities here. And the accessibility to the freeways is really nice. But again, creating this culture and space will be a great thing for the location neighborhood.
All right. Thank you. Did you want to speak to that at all, Ms. Farnham, or?
No, that sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Farnham. This sounds like pretty interesting, and it looks like a very exciting partnership between the two cities, and so something to look forward to as it continues to develop. But I have a question for you, since you talk about creativity and, you know, those type of opportunities that this project brings. Does this project include any type of partnership with school districts? Since, you know, we're talking about community, families, representation, in which way would our or could our school districts possibly have some sort of engagement for ideas, or even physical participation in some of the creative ideas that might come out of it?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Corman. So we did do some outreach to the school district, and particularly to try to get them to participate make them aware of and invite them to participate in the workshop. But again, this project is really kind of centered around a week-long workshop. That it isn't like a year-long kind of effort where we have the time to do all that kind of outreach. But that said, I think that certainly these ideas, and as they move forward from, I mean, this plan will be kind of an idea plan. As it moves forward into implementation, I think involving the school district and others. Again, with some of the outreach we tried to do, I know we did direct mail to folks. We had flyers that we hand walked around to businesses. I know the co-ed staff here, the community outreach and engagement staff here, was in contact with the school folks from the school district, as well as some of the BIPOC partners that they work with, just to let them know. There's the Assumption Church in Richfield is in the larger study area. So I know we tried to make people aware of this project and the opportunity to weigh in. I don't know if we, you know, the online engagement tools just closed down yesterday, and I have not been in touch with the consultant to find out, you know, if they were able to, like, look at who responded and kind of categorize it. I don't know what kind of, if they could say, well, these folks were from the school district, or these folks were from, representing a certain group or whatnot. I'm not sure that they'll be able to aggregate it in that way, but certainly we will be getting a summary of the input that we received from those online engagement over the last month. So, but this is the start. This isn't the finish. So as projects move forward into implementation, certainly engaging more with the various partners in the community, that's a great idea.
All right. Looks like Commissioner Cookton, you have some additional comments.
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. Thanks. It's not really questions, it's more comments. And I don't mean to pour any cold water on things, but these are some comments that maybe are things to think about. And I have a few of them. So the first thing, just to point out that the consultant that's working for the CNU, the Congress for New Urbanism, they're working in a bit of a vacuum, in a sense that they don't have I hate to use the word holistic view that our city staff does. And so when they're proposing these things, they sound a lot like what's being proposed on Lindale. And that's not necessarily good or bad, but I would encourage staff to, as they work with the consultants, to make sure we're bringing in the view of the entire city as it relates to what's happening here, and that we're not taking anything away from Lindale, or just want to make sure that, and it's not the consultant's fault, they're being asked to work in a vacuum, but I hope our city staff is bringing the lens of the entire city view, city plan, as they work through this process. Another comment that was brought up by Commissioner Solberg, and also I believe Commissioner Abdi touched on it, was the existing commercial uses that are happening here, and that those could possibly be redeveloped or proactively rezoned to residential, and whether that is or is not appropriate. And I'm not a city planner, and so I trust city staff judgment on what ultimately happens here. But it just got my mind going that in Bloomington we have protected industrial, and we also have an interest in protected affordable housing. Maybe we need to think about protected commercial. We talked about the mom and pop shops. We talked about that could possibly be phased out with redevelopment. Maybe we need to think of along the lines of protected commercial. As a guy that orders way too much takeout pizza, I'm in this neighborhood a lot, and I would hate to see that go away. So that's something to think about. And related to that, as Commissioner Solberg said, perhaps residential is not appropriate for this neighborhood, and maybe it is and maybe it isn't. But again, as our city staff works with its consultants and provides that wider view of our city in the context of the study, maybe there are some areas in our city that are appropriate for residential, and there are some areas of our city that are not appropriate for residential. And so although residential is good in a vacuum, perhaps when we look at this in the lens of our entire city, it's not appropriate here. And again, I'm not a city planner and I don't know that, but I would ask that city staff makes that consideration as they work with the consultants. And my last thought here, as it relates to naturally affordable housing, when I was sort of looking at Google Maps this morning as I was reviewing some of this, and I certainly appreciate the OHOs, the Opportunity Housing Ordinance. I appreciate the intent of protecting naturally occurring affordable housing. But when I look at the naturally occurring affordable housing in this area, particularly on the Richfield side, less so on the Bloomington side, but it's very low density. And it got my mind going, what's the intent here? And I think, and maybe I differ from the OHO on this, but I think the intent here is to protect naturally affordable, or maybe not naturally, but it's to protect affordable housing stock, not to necessarily protect an affordable housing structure. And so if a very low density group of naturally affordable housing could be redeveloped into something that's much more dense, but replace that number of units into a larger mixed use or larger residential development that matches that number of affordable housing units, I think that's actually a positive and not a negative. And although, as I asked Ms. Farnham earlier, we're not preventing redevelopment of NOAA housing, and we can't. But I don't think we should necessarily dissuade it. And again, maybe I disagree with the OHO on this, but if we could, see an end result that matches the same amount, same number of units that we had previously, but we've densified it and have something that's new and could spur further development because you have new housing there, I think that's a win. And so I would hate to see this effort in any way dissuade redevelopment that could meet what our end goals maybe perhaps really are. And I guess perhaps I'll leave it at that. But other than that, I support what we're doing here. But I think those are just some thoughts for thoughts.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Cookdon. Ms. Farnham, did you want to speak to any of those?
Maybe just a little bit. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Cookdon. So with regard to the consultant working in a vacuum, I mean, yeah, I suppose to a certain extent they are, just by nature of this sort of a project where it's kind of it's a short romance, right? Where we get paired up with somebody and it's really focused around this 1 week design charrette. We actually had a pretty good, in part because it was delayed, but this consultant came out for a recon visit back in 2019. And during that time, we had 2 full days of meetings. We had a meet and greet with city council staff. We had meetings with the various agencies. So they got the whole lowdown on the MnDOT project, on the Metro Transit project. So they got smart pretty fast. And then we also we had a fairly large internal staff team involved in those meetings. Then, because this MnDOT project is kind of the gorilla in the room, last fall, we had a series of some just virtual meetings that included MnDOT as well as the consultant and staff from both of the cities where we're talking about this, because, the changes are, the roadway changes are going to be probably the big significant impact to this area. So in fact, this consultant has, for a short-term project, this consultant has actually had a fair amount of input. But I appreciate the idea that, yeah, we always have to think in terms of our, I mean, that you always run the risk of the consultant as being an outsider coming in, and they don't have the knowledge that the insider, the staff does. But we do work in tandem with them. And as I was saying, the recommendations are recommendations that, staff is the one who carries the water on implementing it. Staff and Planning Commission recommendations, City Council recommendations are what implement it. And so that clearly is the local lens on it. So there is that. And in terms of, yeah, a lot of these ideas are very similar to what you're seeing on Lindale. That's because it's a very similar situation. It's just a different location. But what we're talking about is 50s and 60s development and redeveloping it and trying to make it less auto oriented and more pedestrian oriented. So you're going to see a lot of the same kinds of things. But the devil's in the details of the application in that particular context. Let's see, what else did I want to, I mean, interesting idea about the protected commercial. And I think, obviously one of the things we have to, the protected industrial is a pretty high level sort of blanket kind of designation. Protected commercial, I mean, we don't, through zoning, we allow different kinds of uses, but it's really tricky to try to, I mean, I mentioned earlier this whole thing about displacement and trying to minimize displacement that is, you know, unwanted. And how can we do that? But the fact of the matter is, businesses come and go, and we don't have, you know, the zoning code doesn't control that. The zoning code, by offering more flexibility and a range of uses, as opposed to being, you know, a very narrow range of uses, gives you the most flexibility. And certainly, you know, through the zoning, we can, by our different zoning districts, for instance, the B2 is more neighborhood sized, neighborhood scaled, as opposed to the FD2, which is very much big box oriented. So, so there are some things we can do through zoning to kind of get at that scale. But in terms of uses, and certainly there are some use differences as well, but we can't necessarily say in the zoning ordinance that you need to be locally owned. You can't be a national chain. You know, we don't have that kind of authority in a zoning code. So, so anyway, the protected commercial, it'd be interesting to see if there are any tools. Again, I think it gets down to this whole idea of displacement. Or, you know, the flip side of that is kind of some of those ideas that came out of Lindale is to work with your local businesses and trying to get really being more proactive in terms of small business development in the city. I mean, I think Minneapolis and St. Paul, the bigger cities tend to do that. Bloomington is kind of just starting to get into that sort of arena. But those are the kinds of things where, you know, trying to play matchmaker between the spaces that we have available and some tenants. You know, if there's incubator space, for instance, for small startups or mom and pops, and trying to play matchmaker. I mean, those are some things, and other cities have done it. Mostly bigger cities do that kind of stuff, and we're just getting to that point of redevelopment where those sorts of activities are maybe things that we need to start looking at. So anyway, I appreciate all your insights, your good observations and suggestions. So thank you.
All right, Commissioner Abdi, you have some additional comments?
Yeah, just for some clarification, and I don't have my thoughts organized because I'm still thinking, and I appreciate the presentation from staff. I believe staff is the same staff that presented us the Lindale corridor plan, I believe, Julia, correct? Julie, excuse me.
Yeah, that's correct.
I guess for folks who might be familiar with that plan, and this is a much smaller corridor, the focused area, at least the site area, is much smaller than the Lindale plan, vision site, I should say. I guess my question here is, what is the expected timeline? And I know in a previous comment to some of the questions you mentioned that it would be more on the public infrastructure, some of the changes that you might be thinking. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, most of the changes are going to be on the public side, whether it's street improvements or, you know, aestheticness maybe, not so much on the real estate or uses at this time. Or what are things that are the city is implementing sooner than later? Maybe is that how I'm trying to process my thought process here? One question I had, I guess, is the timeline. And then the other one is, because this site visioning, it borders both cities, Richfield and Bloomington, would the development vision be the same for both cities? And obviously it goes back to timeline. If Bloomington goes in one route, or I guess my question is, would the focused area developed in a way that's consistent with that, whatever that vision is, if both cities accepted or adopted it, or whatever the case may be? I guess it's unique because it's two different city entities. Each city has a different, you know, visioning and policy and funding and timeline. what does Bloomington control in this visioning that we are presented with today? Can we, if we're to move forward with certain projects, say the toy store, whatever the case may be, I guess I'm trying to figure out the issue with the boundary, with having two different cities sharing a small visioning site.
Sure, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Abdi. So this plan, this vision does cross the border, and it's the same on, it covers both sides. Implementation, we don't control Richfield and they don't control us. So there are things that, like redevelopment of properties, like the toy store in Bloomington, that's going to be a Bloomington issue, not a Richfield issue. However, things like public improvements, like to sidewalks, and when MnDOT comes forth with a more detailed design for the changes to Portland Avenue and that whole interchange, some of the ideas in this plan could be pointed to as ways to make sure, or ways to enhance the head bike environment, and or kind of compare to what, whatever MnDOT comes out with. Well, geez, why don't you try something more like that's showing in this plan, that kind of thing. And that would be something, because that's a project that we will be working with Richfield on anyway, because it touches both sides. So in terms of how does that work with the Richfield, that, it's, the vision covers both sides. It's the same plan. Their council will review the same plan that our council reviews. And so, and if there's input from them that would get reflected, I mean, we'll basically just work that out. I guess I don't, again, because it's high level input, high level kind of concept plan, and it's not details like the sidewalk needs to be 8 feet versus 10 feet or something like that. I don't anticipate that we won't be able to agree on the vision. In terms of the timeline for implementation, again, this is a high level sort of recommendation. The implementation will depend on the ideas that come out of this plan will need to be considered in light of all of the other things that are on the city's plate. The city council's kind of expressed some concern about all the things that are on the plate, because you got Lindale, you've got, things going on in South Loop, and there's lots of things going on. So how do we prioritize them? And, I guess that's gonna be on a case-by-case basis. But one of the things that'll happen here, my guess is that the next step is going to really revolve around MnDOT's plans, because changes to that interchange are going to have some property impacts in the area. And we don't know exactly what those are at this point in time, because those details aren't worked out. So I think that's going to drive sort of the next sort of, or when things start to implement in this area. So I don't know if that helps put any more clarity on it.
Does that help, Commissioner Abdi?
Yes, thank you to staff. My thoughts were unorganized, and I'm still trying to process, the two different boundaries and what that would look like should, Bloomington go all boom and, we go crazy with development needs, and I believe, as maybe if I'm hearing you correctly, the Portland Street is not a city street, it's a county street, correct? And therefore the changes to that corridor, whatever that may be, is outside of city approval. And I don't know what that city road reconfiguration would look like. But yeah, I appreciate the answer, and I'm still processing that. And this is not possibly the last we'll see of this plan. Is that correct? will this come back to the commission again, or would this be the final time we'll see it?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Abdi. So the consultant will be pulling together the final draft. We're having a joint informational meeting with the two city councils on April 21st, and then they will finalize the draft. So by the end of May, the draft will be finalized, and then we'll schedule public hearing. And so we're doing public hearings separately. We're not doing joint public hearings. So Bloomington Planning Commission, City Council, Richfield Planning Commission, City Council. And then it'll be, then the plan will be completed.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Farnham. Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just taking a step back. So there's been a lot of discussion about, the MnDOT plan. Can you just give me a high level, 30,000 foot view of what that project is, the timeline, and what places or city or what streets are involved?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Goldsman, I think I'll try and discuss this, and if I get lost here, Julie Long, our city engineer, is on the line too, so she can come in and save me if need be. But so this MnDOT project, it's this Corridors of Commerce project. It's been going on for a couple of years. They're looking at really the whole stretch from 169 all the way down to 77. The main focus is on improving the traffic flow and whatnot at the main interchange of 35W and 494. There's different components to it. There's the min pass lane and this and that. But they've been going through a whole kind of like the environmental review process where they look at different alternatives, and they've narrowed things down, and they looked at different kinds of things on this east stretch between 35 and Cedar, and what they've arrived at as kind of the preferred approach is to make Portland, keep Portland but make it the main interchange. So because right now the interchanges aren't spaced according to desirable spacing. They're too close together. So because you've got one at Nicollet, you've got one at Portland, you've got one at 12th, and that creates a lot of weaving for folks getting on and off 494. So the idea is to close down and to improve mobility along 494. So kind of focus the exit or the interchange at Portland. There will still be one at Lyndale, but also then at Portland, and then down at 77, and close off the access points, the interchanges at Nicollet and 12th, and make those two streets a little bit more, just more of a normal street that crosses over between the two cities. So the bridges will still be there, but they won't be access points to and from the freeway at that point in time. So that provides an opportunity for those stretches of roadway, those reconstructed bridges, to be designed in a way that provides for better pedestrian bike facilities, because you're not having this entrance exit from the freeway that you have to accommodate on those. The flip side of that is that it's all going to happen now at Portland. Well, not all, because people are still going to be able to go to Lyndale and 77, but still it's focused more on Portland. But MnDOT has said that they are committed to making this new interchange at Portland more pedestrian friendly, more bike friendly, more multimodal. At this point in time, they're very early in this process, and funding is always an issue, but you have to go through this whole planning process, and then you got to get funding for it. And I know that they have applied for some grant funding, but the first order of business is to take care of the main interchange at 35 and 494, and then kind of look at the Portland piece of it. Although I think that's all considered part of project number 1 or whatever they're calling it. But again, the focus is on the main interchange, but that'll result in improvements at Portland and closure of Nicollet and 12th. So I don't know, Julie, if there's anything you could add to provide a little more clarity around that.
Sure. As Julie was saying, MnDOT is getting to, for the last 2 years, we've been working on the visioning of the project, and now they're starting to look at the actual first project out of the gate. It's called Project 1, and it looks at the access consolidation in this area at Portland, 12th, and Nicollet. It also includes the interchange at 35W and the necessary frontage road adjustments to build a min-pass lane over to Highway 100. So the first listening sessions that MnDOT has having starts next Thursday on April 1st. It's for the France Avenue area. Then there are 2 more the following week, April 7th and 8th, or 6th and 7th. It'll be posted soon. One of those includes this area. So we're trying to get resident feedback and public input on what the proposed changes are at 12th, Nicollet, and Portland. Like Julie has indicated, the 12th and Nicollet will no longer have freeway access. So we are looking at doing more pedestrian and bike facilities there. We're also looking at improving the Portland crossing, and it also includes a new pedestrian bridge at Chicago. So we recognize that this area needs more crossings. So we're looking at that. We don't have all of the details worked out. Like I said, MnDOT's looking at doing a series of listening sessions in the next 2 weeks. Then in the last week of April, they will be doing more listening sessions to say, hey, we heard this. Can you check us? This is what we think we heard. This is what we're proposing. Is this correct or not? And then in May, we will be coming back to, or not back to, but we'll be coming to Planning Commission with what Project 1 is, and then also to City Council, just to get your feedback as well. Right now, our schedule is a little compressed and we're a little behind, but we're hoping to start construction in 2023 or 2024 if we miss it. And it will be, it'll disrupt the area, but it will be a really good improvement for the area. As Julie mentioned, funding is always an issue. As Chair Solberg knows, MnDOT has applied for an infra grant to help fund parts of Project 1 and also Project 2, which nobody's really all that interested in, except for it's the railroad bridge across 494, and it causes impact and doesn't allow us to move on to the next phases of the project. So does that answer your questions, commissioners? I'm seeing head nods.
Sounds
Thanks.
like you did a good job of explaining it, Julie. Appreciate that. Commissioner Cookton, you have some additional comments or questions?
I just have one question, Commissioner Opti. You got my head going a little bit. I'm not sure if this is for Ms. Farnham or possibly Mr. Markegard. Our city council has joint meetings with the city of Richfield City Council. Has there ever been a joint meeting of the Planning Commission of us and another city?
Mr. Markegard?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we've had several joint meetings over the years. Usually Richfield, Edina, and Bloomington, the 3 cities, and kind of in a study meeting format, comparing notes on development projects and also kind of approaches on meetings. It's been a couple of years since we've had one now, and you know, in the virtual times, it's a little bit more difficult, but I think something we should look at reestablishing going forward.
All right.
Hope we don't give away too many secrets.
All right. Commissioners, any further discussion, comments, guidance for Ms. Farnham? That was a very good discussion. Appreciate the overview, Ms. Farnham. And we're looking forward to seeing this final plan coming out of CNU.
Great. Thank you all for your comments.
All right. At this point, that concludes our standard or our regular items for the March 25th, 2021 Planning Commission. We have no further items, and with that, we'll conclude the meeting tonight. Thank you. And if commissioners can hang on for just a minute, we'll break and have a quick overview of upcoming meetings.